Well, hi-de-ho, neighborinos. It's Bill Whittle here with the Stratosphere Lounge, episode number 116. It's just a giant slog through the pages of history and irrelevance, and 116 episodes later, we're still at it. Apparently, there's still things to talk about. I know there's a little internet left. So, yeah, it's good to be back. I missed a couple weeks in a row. Had a lot of fun last week, and some things that were not so much fun last week either, but it's good to be back. Yeah, we'll just do our little quick, weekend review kind of thing before we get into the questions, and then we'll get going. I've got a hard out at 8 o'clock, so it's a 2-hour show. That ought to get us some traction anyway. A couple big things, big week for me, and I guess everybody wants to talk about both of them before we get into the questions. So, excuse me. First of all, I just wanted to say to everybody, thank you so much for your many kind words about my friend Jerry, who's obviously a lot more than a friend of mine. He was really the dad I should have had on some level. He's I think I'll tell this whole story in some level, but right now, just suffice it to say, for those of you that may be curious about why this guy meant so much to me, I've told his story on the show many times before, I think, but why not? I'll tell it again in its a little briefer form. I met him when I met my friend Steve back in 1970, and when I went over, I was living in Key Biscayne, which at the time was kind of a middle-class neighborhood, and Steve was probably just slightly lower middle class, and I went over there. I was 10, 11 years old. It's the age of the sleepovers, and so I spent the night over there, and in the morning we got up and we saw, we're getting to have getting ready to have some breakfast, and he poured out a bowl of imitation Fruit Loops and poured in this gray water, which is exactly what it looked and tasted like. And I said, "What the hell is this? This is powdered milk. What the hell's? Well, where's the real milk? Well, we don't have any because we can't afford it." The two parents sat down with the four kids and said, "We got enough money to live in a nice-ish place with crummy food, or we can live in a crummy place with better food. Which one do you want?" They took the better house. So that never left me, really. And so Jerry was a geologist, and he was working at the University of Miami, and he'd been doing a lot of work on carbon-14 dating, and he's working with a partner of his. And they were able to find a new chemistry for the carbon-14 dating, which is where you measure the radiocarbon decay from organic materials. It's breathing carbon-14, but once the animal dies, it stops breathing it in, and the carbon-14 starts to decay. And if you know the rate, you can measure the age. So he had come up with a formula for carbon-14 that was all three. In business, it doesn't matter what business it is. They say, if you can get something better is great, faster is great, and cheaper is great. But he did all three. The method he came up with was more accurate, and it was faster, and it was cheaper. So he basically took it to the university and said, "You guys really want to be a part of this?" I said, "We don't think so." So he went out there on his own with his powdered milk income, and started a company called Beta Analytic, and I worked for Beta Analytic right after I got out of college. And when I first got there, it was a tiny little room with a bunch of literally looked exactly like a chemistry lab. They had bubbling beakers and liquid nitrogen cooling all this stuff down. And to make a very long 30-40 year story short, Jerry, one day after running this business, we just got an error saying, and it got an error trying to start recording. Looks like it's recording. I just hate these kind of tech. I'm going to let it go. To hell with it. If this one doesn't get recorded, it's one for the ether. In any event, Jerry basically came home one day to his house in a 1979 Toyota Supra, which was a pretty nice car. And I thought, wow, that's kind of nice. But after working with him for a while, I got a job with him after college and watched the company. And as I say, to make a very long story short, he went from powdered milk to being worth, I don't know, $20-30 million, something like that. That's his share in the company. I generally don't know what the number is. I mean, it might be a half of that, maybe an eighth of that. I don't know. But he's got a tremendous house out in Arizona. I'm going to have to start getting used to calling him, referring to him in the past tense, and that's actually kind of hard. this incredible house and that he built in North Carolina, and built another one out in Arizona. And to me, he was, putting the personal stuff aside, which I'll get to in a second, he was the perfect example to me of everything I admire about this country. He had a lot of brains, and he had a lot of guts, and he took a lot of risks, and they didn't pay off overnight. They took 15, 20 years to pay off. It's one of the reasons I get so torqued when people start talking about the one percenters. Whenever people hear these spoiled kids talking about how we're going to take money from the one percenters and we're going to soak the rich. It's like, most of the rich people I know started out not rich and were the first ones in and the last ones out for 25, 30 years. Because Beta Analytic was so successful, because this formula was so successful, and because the business is so well run, they ended up doing, for a while there, I think they're doing like 94, 95% of all the world's carbon-14. But what's much more important than that is that because they were doing so many, and because they were turning around so fast, the cost of doing samples was cut it's a tenth. So all around the world, people are getting dates and stuff for their particular kinds of research as scientists that they never could have afforded before. And so he ended up doing really, really well by that. Now, that was the professional story. I've told that professional story many times. It's just hard work and guts and brains. Personally, back in, say, 1979, 80, maybe 80, I was at the University of Florida, and after I lost the Air Force, we did a bunch of like Super 8 movies in poking around Coral Gables. My friend Steve and Fritz and some of the guys who I'm still good friends with, and we were making these movies. I went up and became a theater major at the University of Florida, and Florida didn't have a film department. I don't know if it does now, but it certainly didn't then. It had a theater department and an English department. English was where you could do film studies, and I was a theater major. And we wanted to make some movies. This is right when HBO was getting started, and so they were running interstitials. I don't know if you remember the very first days of HBO with the dun 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 ba 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 bum. And they wanted to start the movies on the hour, so they had these little shorts that they used to fill in, and we thought, we'll make some of those, we'll put them on HBO, make some more money than we spent. So I went to them with a business proposition. I said, look, we rent equipment for a week. We can do 3 films if we rent it for a week, and we kill ourselves. And we did. So I think he put up $6,000, and we got 3 Super 8 movies out of that in something we called Miracle Week. I'm sorry, 3 16mm movies, something we called Miracle Week, and they didn't sell, and we didn't make a penny. But we did do what we said we were going to do with his money, and he just seemed to be really happy just having executive producer on the back of that. I think he liked us, and liked me, and wanted to share that success. So he did. And then many years later, when I was doing my sketch comedy show in Gainesville, we were working in the public access cable area. And the equipment there, the editing equipment, just plain didn't work. I mean, it was click track video editing, and it was accurate to, 8 frames, 10 frames, which is just not good enough. It's just not. Just can't work when you're a second or half a second off. Nonlinear editing had just gotten started then. The idea that you digitize footage, put it into a computer, and then you would be able to edit it the way a word processor edits words. If you ever worked on a typewriter, then you know what editing film is like. You lay everything out, and if you make a mistake, you have to go back to where you made the mistake and start over. You don't get to pull things up or expand things out. You just got to go back. So same thing with nonlinear digital editing, and I had this show, and I thought it would work, and so I came back down to him again, and I had a proposal, I think, for $13,000, and in that $13,000, we bought 2 Maxtor Panther drives. I think they were about $4,000 or $5,000 each, and that was the heart of the system. And they were this big and this tall and that deep. They were easily the size of a loaf of bread, 1 gigabyte each, and wow, gigabyte each. You can do wonders with that. So we had 2 whole gigabytes of hard drive there. And we cut the show, and we tried to sell the show, and that didn't sell, and he didn't seem to mind that either. He got to see the shows done. And then I won't go into a whole lot of details about the rest of it, but suffice to say, I got myself into some real trouble with the IRS, and he he saved me. And I didn't have particularly great parents, and when it's nice to have. It's nice for those of you who do have parents, which I'm assuming is most of you, good parents. You have an inherent sense of things might be bad, but you're never going to hit the ground because you've had parents that during your formative years made sure you didn't hit the ground, and I didn't have that, and so several times, but especially that last time when I was really in trouble, I was in real trouble. He just stepped up, and his second wife, who's also wonderful, stepped up, and I walked out of there thinking, oh, okay, so that's what it's like to have real parents. Even if you make horrible mistakes that are entirely your fault, if they can rescue you, they will. And it was amazing. But all of that is just kind of the transactional stuff. The true thing about Jerry that I'm going to miss is he just had the most wicked awful sense of humor, and it's just so dry, and he would just giggle at things, and we I was 10 or 11, go home over at Steve's house, and Jerry'd be back late, and we'd watch Benny Hill and laugh and laugh and laugh, and we kept him laughing the whole time. He has a really dark sense of humor, and I indulged it as much as I could. I just write him letters. His emails are just ridiculous, and constantly talk about. He had a really nice place in Arizona. Constantly talk about how he went up, visited Nova Scotia. I said, you're going to have to come back pretty quick. The people in Arizona no longer have that terrorized look in their eyes, and I'm getting a little concerned about a peasant uprising, and we need the firm rod of discipline back here, and maybe murder a few people in the evenings just to get them back in line. I used to joke to him about getting organs from the third world, for a dozen down there and all this stuff. Just he's a very gentle and kind guy, and when you're facing these medical things, for me anyway, and certainly for him, the way we deal with it was we just joke about it. And as I mentioned on that Facebook post, when it was looking really, really bad, when he was in the hospital, when I saw him last time, I said, I'm going to make a big mobile. When you wake up from the surgery, it's going to be mobile, make it out of black construction paper. It's going to be a bunch of black vultures circling. I'm going to get little red LEDs for the eyes. And he just laughed and laughed, and that's what I would like to have somebody do for me if I'm in that kind of trouble. It's just, keep it light and keep me laughing. But, he always treated me as an equal, and he always, he was always there when I needed help. And as I said on, I don't know if I said this on the post, I certainly said it to his wife, I certainly said it to him before he went away, you would never have heard of me. None of you would have ever heard of me, ever, if it hadn't been for this guy. Not just for the fact that without his help I would never have been a filmmaker, I would have never been a TV editor, I would have never had the job I had before I got the eject thing. I'd be under a bridge someplace with a needle in my arm, I think, without this guy. And he was the best. He was a brilliant, funny, smart, successful guy. Oh, and by the way, a Marine also. And I certainly don't want this to come off sounding anything other than the way he told it to me. But he joined the Marines back in the early 50s, real early 50s. And he wanted to be a rifleman. He was a smart guy. And he joined the Marines to be a rifleman. He was worried if he was tough enough, and so he said, well, what am I going to do if I'm tough enough or not? So he figured the toughest thing he could do is join the Marines, so he joined the Marines and went to Korea and was under fire in Korea, and he purposely screwed up the aptitude test for the Marine Corps. That's why being careful a second ago, I don't mean to want to suggest, especially today, that these guys are stupid. They're certainly not. I'll get to the second half of the story, the sub-story, and put that to rest right away. But Jerry wanted to be a combat infantryman, and so he basically threw the test. Because if he hadn't, they would have put him in intelligence or something like that. And he wanted to go out and see what he's made of. And, for those of you who know the Korean War, being in Korea, in 51, 52 with the Marine Corps. Was 53 was not pretty, and it wasn't fun. It was cold and terrifying, and human wave attacks and all that stuff. So, he's just a remarkable guy, and so much of not just the physical things that he did to keep me afloat. I mean, just so much of the encouragement, and that's really it. I mean, ultimately, you get right down to it. When I started to see these houses that he was building, when I first saw that Supra, I began to put the two things together. I began to put them together, that if you work really hard and you keep at it, sooner or later, you'll get there. And I've talked on the show many times about the number of failed companies I've had. He funded most of them. Yeah. So anyway, he got out of the hospital. He had this heart valve operation. And he got back home. He had a real bad valve. Last time I saw him was in the hospital. I saw him about 3 weeks before that. And I was very hopeful because I said, my dad, my real dad, had a triple bypass back when, I don't know, he must have been in his mid-60s then. And I was about 30, and I called him the night of the surgery, my dad, and I was expecting hearing, hello. And I got him, 2 hours after he woke up from this bypass operation. I said, how you doing, Dad? He said, Billy, I have never felt better in my life. I have never felt better in my life. I'll just get up and run around the room. So I was kind of hoping that Jerry would get the same kind of effect. If your body's just being strangled of oxygen over years, it can get to you. But when they went to take a look at his valve, he'd lost so much weight, and he's been on had a kidney transplant, so all the immunosuppressants, all this. Anyway, so I was hoping he'd get some relief out of that, but it didn't really do it, and we knew it wouldn't. Once they went in to do the first valve operation, they saw so much blockage, and he was so weak by then that they knew that wasn't gonna be another operation. So I'm just very glad he got to go home, and he flew west right at sunset, just as the sun was setting over his desert home, and he was in this spectacular place, the most spectacular house I've ever seen. He sat there in the middle of his spectacular house with his wife holding his hand, and just looked out over his desert and closed his eyes, and that was that. So, like my real dad, who also had a terrific exit, I think that's about all you can ask for. And he certainly had enough time so that all of his kids, me included, got a chance to tell him how much he meant to us, and that's great. And we didn't. And he was just, I don't know, just hilarious. So anyway, that was that, and I just wanted to thank you mostly for your unbelievable comments and your prayers and your support and all the rest of the stuff on the Facebook page. It meant a lot to me, meant a lot to him too. I showed it to him, when he was in the hospital, and the idea that complete strangers were saying those kind of things and pulling for him really was a mystery to him. But it wasn't a mystery to me. I knew it was out there, and his final days, I think he began to really realize just the kind of impact he had, not just on me, on everybody. So it was as good as good an exit as you can have. And finally, his quality of life was awful. I sent the picture I took of my surgery, was it 5-6 weeks ago, that initial surgery with the stitches. I sent it to him, and he sent back a picture of his hand, and the skin after 10 years of these immunosuppressants essentially just comes off. It just looked like something out of Thriller. It was just horrible. So he was a tough old guy, and he fought to the end, and that's about all you can ask for. And I'm really going to miss him. So anyway, in other news, and I know most of you probably seen the Afterburner, I just want to tell you real quick about the sub trip, because I do have a limited amount of time today. That was fully spectacular. It's one of the things I wanted to do my entire life. And when you get on that boat, you just go down that hatch, and you have no sense of motion. You have no sense of day or night. It is absolutely astonishing. And the smooth, I guess I mentioned in the Afterburner, I'm not going to repeat everything I said in the Afterburner. I think the one thing I just want to add here about the sub trip was just two things. First of all, nuclear power is absolutely awesome. It's just unbelievable 165 million watts of heat back there, and they're driving this hotel through the water at 20 knots, 600 feet down, and the air conditioning is just absolutely perfect. It's 70 degrees, 71 degrees, and they're making their own air out of seawater. They're making their own water out of seawater. Just a question of how many cans of soup they can hold on the boat. Otherwise, you go around the world 20 times. One of the things that you get too much detail on was, because I would have done a 7-hour afterburner on this, frankly, but the LA class attack sub actually only has 2 watertight doors on the whole boat. You would think there'd be these kind of hatches, in case of flooding, but nope, there's just 2. There's the front of the sub and the back of the sub. And the whole second half of the sub, the whole back of the sub was just amazing. I never got back there. I'm sure there were some people back there. It must have been a bunch of people back there, but I never got back there. But I'll tell you what I did see. Just before I climbed up into the sail, and I had my harness on, and went up that ladder and did all the ducking and jumping. And it's not a straight shot up to the top of the sail. But just as I was getting into the harness, there's so little room there that the other person I went up there with was also getting into his harness. And I'm backed up in a corner, and as I look around the corner, I can say, oh, holy crap, this is one of those 2 doors that leads to the back of the sub where all the machine stuff is. And the reactor. And there's a little tiny hole in the door. And I look back there, and there's this red light in this kind of long corridor along the side of the boat. And between where I was and the back, where all the machinery is and the turbines and all the rest of it, was a nuclear reactor. And that reactor was making... It wasn't completely running at full temperature, obviously. It wasn't even breathing hard. But 165 million watts of heat right there. And I talked to a sub guy who I like very much named Oliver, and he said he did a 7-month deployment. And when he got back out of that deployment, they took his radiation badges, and they found out that these guys took a lower dose being on the sub than they would have if they'd been out in the daylight. And certainly an infinitely lower dose than they would have if they'd been flying consistently. Because once you get up in the 35,000 feet, you're above an awful lot of the atmosphere, and you take a pretty... Look, it's not significant. This is the whole point. Everybody overreacts so much. When you go on a high airplane ride, you're up there 5-6 hours, you're taking a cosmic ray dose. And we're designed to survive these things and repair them. So anyway, the boat was great. The trip was great. The nuclear power was amazing. I was not the slightest bit uncomfortable. Of course, I wanted to be an astronaut, so it wasn't like I got claustrophobic, didn't have a single thought ever about the depth or, the hull being crushed, none of that nonsense. But I think the thing I was most impressed with was just the quality of the people there, which is not surprising. Average age on the boat of enlisted men is 22, and, this is the thing that really drives me nuts about the progressives. I think this more than anything is this idea that, the military's for the stupid kids. I saw 22, 23-year-old guys, running 165 megawatts of nuclear power, driving a decent-sized hotel through the water, 600 feet below the surface, and everything was done perfectly, and everything was correct, and everything was checked and double-checked and triple-checked, and everybody's looking out ahead, and everybody's thinking about what's going to happen next. And they looked and acted like they were in their 50s, but they weren't. They were in their early 20s, and I say looked that way. I mean, they were that serious. And yet they had a good time, and everybody was happy, and, I bash millennials as more than just about anybody in this world, but they're millennials too, and they are down there and out there right now, they and a bunch of other guys. I was a little surprised at how long it took to turn the boat around between deployments. I thought they'd go out on a 6-7 month deployment, bring the boat back, spend 2 weeks or so refurbishing, take right back out again. But apparently they take 15 months. They do a 7-month deployment. They do anywhere from 10 to 15 months. They take more time in port because on any given cruise, when they come back, they'll lose about 20%, maybe 30% of the crew will just rotate out. And they're not just going to go out there with a bunch of greenhorns. They got to train these guys up for combat, train them up. It's serious business. But I had the best possible time. I love the Navy and I love the military, and I love talking to these guys, and I love telling their story because there's not a lot of people out there that do, and the few that do don't really know it well enough to tell it. They don't really know. They don't really know the environment well enough to really tell it the way I can, because I spent, a couple thousand hours on subsims, I guess, and I just wanted to talk tactics. I just wanted to grab everybody who would listen to me and just talk tactics. I wanted to say, all right, so you got this Mark 48 ad cap. It's a swim-out torpedo. So basically you got a little hydraulic push that puts it out there. And I want to know how much of a launch transient that is. And can you generally just swim this thing out to another attack transient, have it go active on a different vector? And that's all I wanted to do. Nah. Anyway, there you go. So, hey, somebody just said, I'll be honest, Bill's never this late. Somebody want to hit him up in the comment stream and tell him that the show's been on. Maybe he needs a refresh or something. I hope the hell the show's on. I got the records lit and I got timers running. So anyway, so that was my sub trip, and that was a heck of a great thing. And I wish you could have seen that sub video, but I'll just have to get used to that now. Let's get going because I have an interesting thing tonight. I have to leave here at 8, and maybe I get a chance to tell you about that next week, depending on how things go. So these questions are in order of their thumbs up on the Facebook page, more or less. I selected a couple, but you get the general ideas. Here we go. We're back with our friend Cheryl Twomey, who asks, having met Ted Cruz, do you believe the affair story? Do you really think he's pulled a slick Willie? I don't. I don't believe it. I am not going to bet my life that it didn't happen. I remember hearing Herman Cain last time around, and a couple people say, would you endorse Herman Cain? I said, yeah, I liked Herman Cain a lot. And then the stories had started coming in about Herman Cain, and I talked to his campaign manager, and I said, is there anything to this? No, absolutely false. Absolutely false. And he's going to go the whole ways. Herman Cain is going to the nomination. He's going to the convention whether he gets the nomination or not. 3 days later, he's out of the race. But I don't know. Cheryl, I don't think it's true. I certainly got such a good sense out of Ted. He's so well raised. Powerful people, on the other hand, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But at this point, look, I was going to say at this point I don't care. I do care. I don't want to be lied to. But there's really just kind of, can we just do over this election? Look, I think Ted is a remarkable guy, and I don't believe it. But if it were true, I wouldn't fall off my perch either. You know, it's not, I would just wouldn't walk into a wall, and I just don't believe it's true, but again, I suspect it's possible. But let me just say one thing about Ted, because I do know him better than I know the other candidates, and he's not a friend of mine, but he's walked across rooms to shake my hand, that kind of thing, which I thought was pretty impressive. When I first met Ted, and several times I met him afterwards, the way I meet him is we're backstage at an event, right? We're doing AFP Dallas, or he brought me out to Texas to introduce him, specifically just to introduce him one time. And so, I get a chance to sit backstage with him and chat with him for, 10, 15 minutes before either he goes on or I go on. I don't know I've been in front of him, I've been following him. But the one thing I can say with a lot of clarity is, having spoken to him an awful lot backstage in person, before he announced he was running years ago, I said, if Ted runs for president, there's going to be a real problem. The problem is the guy is so nice. He's so nice and so genuine that I don't know if people are going to think he's alpha enough for this line of work. And so when I hear people talk about him, and then I see some of it too, and how they say it comes off very, kind of condescending or preachy or stiff or whatever. I think I see it. I mean, I do see it, and I'm a little disappointed. I'd wanted to talk to the campaign about, submitted kind of a proposal through some channels, and I said, look, I think I can help Ted, and I don't want to tell Ted how to act on camera. I want to see if I can show Ted how to not act on camera, because the real Ted is a sweet, sweet man, and absolutely genuine. People are worried he's going to impose, Christian totalitarianism on the country. I mean, the guy had the Constitution memorized when he was 7 or 8. He has nothing but respect for the country and the protection of our freedoms, which is the freedom to have whatever religion you want or no religion. So so I really like him. He's by far the smartest guy in the race. I think Ted Cruz. In fact, I know Ted Cruz is smarter than the other three combined. Hillary, Bernie, and Donald. And I'd like to see the campaign run a little better. And I think I'd like to see. If I had advice for him, I would go at his perceived shortcomings straight on. I go right at him. And we'll see. We'll get a chance to talk, see what happens. So yes, I don't believe it's true. I've seen them together. I don't know. I was going to say it doesn't make a difference. It does make a difference, but at this point, even if it was true, he'd still be, my candidate. I just don't know why. He believes this stuff, and by the way, not only does he believe it, he not only believes it when he's trying to get elected, he believes it once he's been elected. He filibustered on the Senate floor, and he called Mitch McConnell a liar because he was, and he's gotten into a lot of trouble with the GOP establishment. He is the GOP outsider that Donald Trump claims to be. Anyway, that's that. J.T. O'Connell asks, when possible, I subject leftists to mutual open-mindedness testing. That is, I describe the leftist views to their satisfaction, and then they describe my views to my satisfaction. Interrupting here, that is the mark of a great debater, and that is a mark of somebody who's got a tremendous ability to win arguments. They say that I've heard many times the only way we can have a real argument would be if I start out stating your position in such a way that you said that's fair, and then you'd state my position in a way that I'd say that's fair. But to continue with what JT wrote here, without fail, I find that leftists do not even know my position. They don't hate us. They hate the caricature created as a totem to represent us. That's maybe the best sentence I've ever read. It's absolutely true. How do we penetrate through this false identity used to hide the things we actually believe? And is this why it becomes easy to turn leftists once you manage to shed light on our true beliefs instead of the facade that they've been blinded by for their entire lives? There's so much to say about this. I just do an hour just on this. They're precisely correct. They don't hate us. They hate what we think we are. And when I've gone to liberal colleges, which hasn't been a lot, I found that I thought I was going to go and say, look, I'm going to give you guys a real reasonable rational description of what conservatism is. And I realized both times very quickly, that actually what I needed to do, and my work was done when I convinced them that I was just a decent guy. Once they realized I was a decent guy that actually cared about people, they were astonished. And so this is the result of them using this unearned moral superiority against us. We have better ideas, but that doesn't matter because we're evil. We're the villains. And when they find out that you're not evil, then they have to listen to you in a way that they weren't prepared to before, and that is why it's so easy to flip them. And really what it comes down to is they claim that they care about people, and we don't, and we're only interested in money. And the way you beat this argument is you say, no, we actually care more about people than you do because your policies have been ruinous. There's no question about that. Just look at Detroit. Death by Democrats. And you keep doing the same things to enslave entire blocks of the population. And you tell yourself that you're doing good, but anybody can see that you're doing harm. And we believe that there's a better way to do this. And we believe there's a better way to do it because we care more about these people. We care more about the people who are hurting in America than you do because we're willing to do unpopular things to make it better while you're only willing to do popular things to make yourself look good. So, that's pretty much it. But once they find out that you're coming from a place of humanity, it's actually pretty easy, JT. And one of the, every now and then I just think of things on the fly and they become part of my routine. They pretty much work their way into all their sketches, speeches and stuff. But I think there's just this. Remember, I just had a blinding flash when I first uttered this. I thought this is so good. It's such a good argument because it's so true. And that was the argument that when I said, look, if healthcare were free, I'd be a progressive on healthcare. What kind of a jerk would you have to be to say no healthcare for you if it were free? I mean, seriously, if you were going to deny people free healthcare, which is what they claim we're trying to do, we're trying to deny people free healthcare. Of course you'd be a low-life bastard if you were trying to deny people free healthcare just because you didn't like the way they looked. And if healthcare were free, I'd be a progressive about healthcare. And if other things like that were free, I'd probably be a progressive about a bunch of things. If there wasn't an external threat, I'd probably be progressive about the military. And if there wasn't, if you could just print money forever and not have any consequences, I'd be a progressive about all of that stuff. I'd be a progressive about all the stuff that they're progressive about if it were true, but it's not. Healthcare isn't free, it costs money. So since it costs money, we got to talk about how to pay for it. Once we talk about how to pay for it, then we're back on conservative ground, competition and all the rest of this stuff, using the market to help you instead of to hurt you. It is easy to flip them, JT, but the first thing you have to do to flip them is you have to show them enough humanity to make them believe that you really do care about people, and you care about them as much as they do, if not more, and you have a different way of trying to achieve success than they do. And this is where you can really get some leverage, because I don't think there's a progressive out there who can say, that 70 years of democratic voting by Black America has left Black America in a state of absolute magnificence. I don't think there's anybody making the case that Black America is just sailing along. It couldn't be better for them. They've been voting Democrat for 60, 70 years. You can't get around that. And so that's how you can get to these people, I think, and just get in there and flip them. But yeah, you got to show them the humanity first, and the actual compassion. I mean, I'm a conservative because I feel compassionate towards people. I don't want them to be slaves. I don't want to trade them, food pellets for votes. I find it repulsive. I don't want those kind of votes. It's like stealing money or winning by cheating. It's immoral and it's evil. So once you come from those places and you make it clear you're actually trying to do some good, then there you go. Moving on here, Nathan Stanley says, Mr. Whittle, thanks for answering my question last episode. You're welcome. I have another for you. As a young conservative, I'm constantly looking for gaps in our ideology and history. We can both agree that Democrats and Republicans did not switch sides, as you previously have addressed, but how and when did the left hijack the term liberal, meaning to liberate, and transfer it into today's drivel? It's a great question. First of all, if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that up until like 2 years ago or so, I would talk about liberals and conservatives and liberals. I don't use that word liberal anymore, and if I do, I catch myself and pull it back. I call them progressives. They call themselves progressives because they've used up the word liberal. So many ideas that they called liberal are just absurd, and now people don't want to hear about liberal ideas, so they keep changing their name. It's like a company with a really bad reputation, a company that's just being sued constantly. They're just changing their address, and they're changing their logos, and they're changing their name, and they're changing their colors all the time because their reputation eventually catches up with them. But I think there's a better answer than that, Nathan. And to get to it, you have to start with a sentence that I use occasionally on this topic. And I don't much like the sentence because it reeks of kind of sophistry sometimes that, you can hear trial attorneys do. But nevertheless, it's true. And to understand how the term came about that way and how I feel about it, you start with this sentence. I'm a conservative because I'm trying to conserve traditional liberal values. That's what I'm trying to conserve. I'm trying to conserve classical liberalism. But what does that mean? Well, classically liberal ideas, the word liberal comes meaning to liberate, to set free. And liberal ideas are things like individual rights, inviolate individual rights that cannot be voted away. The right to protect yourself and defend yourself is a liberal idea. The idea of private property is a shockingly liberal idea. When everybody worked for the king, everybody was owned by the king or by the duke or whatever, and they could just come into your property, take whatever they want, including your wife, and force you to do whatever they want to, and that you got to keep, some pittance out of what, you made for them. The idea that you could have private property is a shockingly liberal idea. The idea that you could say whatever you want to without fear of the consequences, so long as you don't libel somebody and tell a lie, that's a fantastically liberal idea. And the individual, the ability to succeed or fail on your own merits, as Jerry did, is a liberal idea. They were liberal ideas when they came out. But liberals don't believe in any of these things anymore. Liberals don't believe in free speech anymore. They believe in protected speech. They believe that free speech can be hateful and damaging and harming, and it causes them to have trigger warnings or trigger emotions. Then they need their safe spaces, which is just another form of saying, shut up. I don't agree with you, so shut up. Your presence here on campus makes me want to seek therapy, so therefore go away, so we don't want to hear you talk. We don't want other people to hear you talk either. Because the one thing that happens now in an American college is you got to be sure that you go to a college where you don't get to hear any differing opinions of any kind. That's the main purpose of college today. And this is all a product of the left's brainwashing of America over the course of the 40 or 50 years they've been at it, and they've done it. They started out in universities in the 60s. They had communist professors teaching journalism students, and journalism students became journalism professors, and then journalism professors created an entire patch of so-called journalists who feel that the greater truth is more important than the big truth, the social truth. Yet we know that Hillary Clinton's a liar, but she's in favor of women's rights, so we're not going to report all this bad stuff because in the long term it's bad. And this is how they justify just hearing their own opinions. Yeah. Bernie's a nut in terms of his economic policies, but we're not going to ask any questions about that because we like what he's going to do. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Abu Ghraib runs 52 consecutive days on the front page of the New York Times because conservatives are evil by definition, and so we're going to destroy them. So they sweep through journalism and then pop culture, and I know an awful lot of actors, and I know an awful lot of directors and writers and people in show business, actors especially. Let me just say one thing about actors to give you an idea where this is going. If it turned out that the popular viewpoint was to support the Iraq War, that the popular viewpoint was against gay marriage, then that's where they'd be. All they want is to be adored and liked, and so they follow the same script as everybody else. I think the thing I like most about this, trying to respond to this argument of how is it that you're, what happened to the word liberal? And I've mentioned this a few times before. It's my kind of king of the hill theory. So it basically works like this. I wish I had a chalkboard in front of me. I'll try and draw it out for you. So let's imagine that, let's start over here. I have to do it backwards. So here's increasing human happiness, right? Awesomeness. The higher you go, the happier people are. And then down here in the origin is where we are right now. And then across this axis here is increasing activism. So as we move further and further and further, we get more and more activism. We get more and more social justice warrior types. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is, when black people are slaves, and when black people don't get to have drink out of the same water fountain, everybody who's got a soul is a liberal. People who are repulsed by that are liberals. They want to change it. And the same thing if your river's on fire. If they're pouring mercury into the river, this is where that company swinging their fist is impacted my nose. And if you don't want the rivers on fire, and if you don't want all the fish to die and stuff, then increasing environmentalism, you're a liberal. So basically what I'm saying is, if we start over here at the origin, equal rights for women, same exact thing. If you think that women should not be allowed to do certain jobs or any jobs, and you think that they shouldn't be allowed to succeed, that things should be closed off to them, they should stay home barefoot and pregnant, and they can't be any of these things except for maybe school teachers and nurses. Okay, well, if you believe that, that's fine. But people who don't believe that are liberals. They're all liberals. We were all liberals then. And so what happens is, as time goes on, activism is increasing and happiness is increasing. Swell. The problem with the progressives is they think that this is just a diagonal line that continues forever. They think that the more activism you get, the more activism you move, the happier people are going to be. But it ain't true, because as you get to the point where as increasing activism is making people happier, that's grand. We're all liberals on that side of the curve. But when you get to the top of the curve, increasing activism, going that way, actually starts to make things worse. For example, if you don't like separate but equal, and if you think black people should have the same exact rights and opportunities as everybody else, that's great. You're a liberal and you're in favor of increasing activism. But when you get to the point where everybody has a vote and everybody has their rights protected and everybody is equal under the law, then if you continue with the activism, you start getting into things like, now we're going to start getting into things like quotas, and we're going to start getting into things like lowering standards for people. And now, as the activism continues to increase, human happiness goes down. So with the EPA, if you're in favor of keeping mercury out of the drinking water, swell, we're all liberals then. But when the EPA reaches peak effectiveness, and then they start going further, and then they start making sure that you can't open a dry cleaning store without a $7,000 or $70,000 environmental impact study to make sure, then this increasing activism is not making life better, it's making it worse. And so the curve starts to go down. And all of this is asymptotic. I don't mean to be, poking graphs at you all day, but we know that a exponential curve goes like this. The further time goes on, the faster it rises. Well, an asymptotic curve is just the opposite. An asymptotic curve means that the more that time goes on, the increases get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's the truth for feminism, it's the truth for race relations, it's the truth for the EPA, just as 3 examples. When people are enslaved, you want to set them free. Great, we're all liberals on that side of the curve. But when race relations are at the point where now increasing activism means like you can't wear dreadlocks because you're not black, or the kind of feminism that says that boys are essentially defective girls and we have to medicate them so that they don't run around rowdy pointing guns, then increasing activism makes life worse. Now you're on the other side of the curve. Once you're on this downward slope where increasing activism makes things worse and worse and worse, then you want to stop and you want to go back. And that's what I want to do. I want to conserve things. I want to go back to peak happiness. And we're well past peak happiness in virtually every social arena you can think of. Some regulations, look, a lot of the myth of the robber barons is a myth. The robber barons weren't but just let's go back to like Dickens in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Yes, I would like to have laws that keep children out of the factories, and yes, I'd like to have safety laws, and yes, I like an 8-hour day, 5 days a week instead of a 10-hour day, 6 days a week. Yes, that's fine. We're all liberals then. But when unions start demanding so much money for people to literally sit around and do nothing, at LA Unified School District right now, there are something like 6,000 teachers that are paid not to teach because they've committed these horrible disciplinary problems, but they can't get fired because the teachers union just simply will not let then it doesn't work anymore. You've gone too far. You have to back up. You have to go back up to where the top of the curve is. You want to go back to be king of the hill. So as long as progress is improving things, activism is a better word than progress because progress is progress. As long as increasing activism is making people happier, then I'm a liberal. But as the second that increasing activism starts making life worse, I'm a conservative. I want to stop doing this destructive thing, and if I have to go backwards a little bit to where things were better, that's where I'll go. As I was saying, things like, child labor laws, good. Having now the 37th freest economy in the world, where all of these licenses and all of this red tape and all these forms and all these taxes means you can't go out and do things for people, make their lives better the way Jerry did with Beta Analytic. When you now have so many regulations that we're not talking about mercury in the rivers now. Now we're talking about have you fully complied with the and people are going out of business because of these regulations and these taxes. Now we're past peak optimal happiness. We're past peak regulation. Now it's time to back up, stop, conserve, go backwards back to where it was better. And in some areas, although not come to mind right now, if things continue, I can't think of a single thing where we're not past peak awesomeness. Space program's past peak awesomeness, all of it. We've just gone too far. And once we get, I'll just wrap this up by saying this. Let's say that the EPA is designed to clean up the environment, and it was. Great. So it has a huge job ahead of it. And it took 30 years to do the job. Those of us who are old enough remember people just chucking bags of garbage out of the car and the black streaks behind airplanes when they took off and little puffs of blue smoke coming out of the back of every car and stuff. Fine. As long as they're cleaning up the environment from actual toxins, great. But then, when they've accomplished their mission, what do? Their budgets never get smaller. They get bigger all the time. And they never say, well, let's all give ourselves a big pat on the back and dissolve this organization now. We've got sensible regulations in place that need to stay in place. No. Then they have to start looking for things to do. And as all of the easy things and the important things are done, then they have to start looking for smaller and smaller and more nuisance things that have a smaller and smaller payoff. And next thing you know, you've got an agency that has 5 times the budget it started with, trying to do half of 1% of the work it originally did. And it just gets ridiculous and ludicrous. So that's how I think I would deal with that. We were all liberals when being a liberal made people happier. But this idea that constant increasing activism to the point of, like I said, this cultural appropriation nonsense and this safe space nonsense and all the rest of it, that's increasing advocacy, and it's ridiculous. Time to stop and go back a little bit. Let's see here. Randy Schnickel asks, it's been 2 years since you've... You know what? I'm going to let this go. I'm sorry, Randy. I just don't really have time for this one. Just to give you the quick case. He pointed out an afterburner I did about EMP attacks, and nothing has happened since then. And I kind of cut and pasted the answer, and basically EMP is a whole hour, just that. But I did want to say this very briefly. You know, Obama said we need the stimulus package. You remember this back in 2009. And he asked for and got $850 billion. $850,000 million. And he did it because it was basically a job program, which never works. You know, FDR prolonged the Depression by 6-7 years. But he got it. So $850 billion were spent by the federal government. And originally, when they were trying to, hassle this thing through, there was, as always, a talk about, we're going to repair the infrastructure, we're going to repair the roads, we're going to repair bridges, we're going to fix the tunnels, where all of our crumbling infrastructure is going to get fixed. And what happened was that all of this money started getting set aside, and the feminists started, who was a big core part of the progressive agenda, right? The feminists started saying, and not just the feminist minorities as well, saying, we got this $850 to repair infrastructure, but almost all of this money is going to white males who work in construction, have construction companies. What the hell is this? And so, instead of fixing bridges, we set up cultural centers, and we set up programs to study, gender study programs, and we spend that $850 billion on things that we don't need and could have done. And one of the things we should have done is we should have hardened our electrical grid. There's so much to say about this. Most of you know what EMP is. This electromagnetic pulse attack, where a nuclear weapon detonated in space generates enough of a magnetic field that it cooks all of our electronics, brings all the transformers down, and basically bombs us back into the Stone Age. One bomb in orbit. And it's true. So there are ways to harden this. There are ways to prevent this from happening. And the one thing I learned from Frank Gaffney, who's been all over this, he's a great guy, was that that these power stations, not where they generate the power, but the transformer stations, the substations where they kind of distribute the power. He said that these transformers are like the size of a railroad locomotive, and no two of them are the same. There are no two of them the same. Each one of them is custom built. And so if one of them goes down, then we have to wait 6 months to a year to have that one rebuilt. And if I had $850 billion, one of the things I'd be doing with it is I'd be saying, before it goes down, why don't we just get a standard transformer and make a bunch of them, replace them now one by one, rewire them in there so that the parts are interchangeable, and then if something goes south, we'll have a bunch of them on the shelves. We'll just get them where they need to go. Nope, that would be sensible. There's so many things you could do that would be sensible with that kind of money, but they didn't do it. And first university I spoke at, I want to say, was Southern Utah University, and I met the Mormons up there when I was up there in 2009. And I bring them up now only to say that watching the Mormons for an afternoon made me realize, oh, this is what a government should be: quiet, efficient, looking forward, preparing for disasters. They've got their welfare square that's feeding hundreds of thousands of people around the world. They're providing jobs for people that don't have jobs. They've got, in the mountains, they've got all of their genealogy stored on computers. They've got probably enough food for 10 years locked away, stored away. They're not blowing the money. They're preparing. They're just getting ready. And for what? And nobody knows. But I remember seeing a little placard right below a couple of the grain towers in Welfare Square in Salt Lake City, and the bishop who initiated this said, I almost have this verbatim, the quote was something like, "These grain towers are here to remind us of a day that may come when money will not buy food." Yeah, okay. The Mormons are ready for a day when money will not buy food, because money's no good, or the economy's collapsed, or whatever, and they're ready. And that's what the entire government should be doing and nothing else, just that, but they don't. And when you say $10 billion has gone here or $20 billion has gone there, it's not in a bank someplace. It didn't get dumped in a, it's not in the Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse. It's not like that's where the hundreds of billions of dollars or trillions of dollars have gone. They've gone into people's pockets. And they've gone into the pockets of people who've taken that money from you and me as taxpayers by coercive force and produced nothing in exchange for that. Not like people like Jerry who produced something of value that people wanted and voluntarily gave him money for. They've taken the money from people who invent things and work hard, and they've stolen it. And that's where it's gone. It's gone into their pockets. They've become rich even though they're stupid and lazy because of the power of politics. Let's see. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep a little track on the time here, and I want to get the good ones. Okay, here we go. Mike Massetti. Okay, 10th week trying, he says. Mike, 10's the charm. I find your ability to communicate conservative and small L libertarian principles better than anyone in my lifetime. Thank you, it's very kind. Including all of the famous talking heads on TV and radio. My question is, why aren't you exploring a nationally syndicated radio show? I believe you'd be exceptional. Is it because of the time it would take away from your other passions, flying, etc.? Yes. That's exactly right. That's it exactly, Mike. I years ago I sat in for Rusty Humphreys. For a while there I was doing it, I think I did it 5 times in a year or two. And Rusty Humphreys is it's a 3-hour conservative radio talk show, and he just sits down and talks for 3 hours. Although it's nothing like 3 hours, because it's a 6-hour segment, and then 4 minutes of commercial, then it's a 5-minute segment, then 7 minutes of commercial. Compared to what we're doing right now, it's easy. I mean, Stratosphere Lounge, you got 116 episodes. They're 2 hours at least, and some of them are 3. And there's not a break, and there's no guests, and there's no call-in. It's just me yapping. So yeah, I'm quite sure I could do it. But it is such a full-time job that I just don't want to do it. I haven't had exactly hard offers, but I've certainly had enough opportunities so that if that's what I wanted to do, I have no doubt I could have done it quite a while ago. And I come back to what I mentioned before. All of this political stuff is not my first choice in life. And I think after this election, I'm going to pull every string I've managed to spin over the course of the last 8 years doing this. And I'm going to try and get these movies made, because these films are a better way to reach people. They don't know they're being reached. You're reaching 16, 17, 18-year-olds instead of 60-year-olds, and you're entertaining them, and you're putting these messages in their head in such a subtle way that they don't even know they're getting a message. And you're reaching millions and millions of people. And that's how they took everything away from us, is through the pop culture, and that's how I want to get it back. So it's very kind of you to say so. And certainly if somebody dropped a radio show into my lap for a limited period of time, I would certainly bite on it. But you also have to ask yourself, is there going to be a contract that's going to come along with that? And it's not fair either. If your heart's not in it, it's a lot of work. And as Arctarian just said, this is my radio show. I just don't get paid for it. It would be nice. It'd be nice to have the reach, especially. It'd be nice to have the reach in the platform. It'd be nice to, I reach the same people, and I don't reach nearly as many people as I would like to reach. So that would be nice. Cameron Smith says, Bill, given your latest submarine adventure, how would you describe to the founding fathers the amount of, let's just say, crap your pants the country they founded is capable of delivering to any corner of the globe? The Pasadena is an attack sub. It's designed to kill Russian nuclear missile subs, our nuclear missile subs, Ohio-class subs. A typical boomer, a typical Ohio-class nuclear missile sub, which is not the one I went on. Not the kind I went on, has, I want to say, 24 Poseidon missiles. And prior to all these arms limitation talks, they had at least 3 multiple warheads, and maybe as many as 7 MIRVs. It's been stated many times that one American ballistic missile submarine contains more explosive power than every single bomb dropped in World War II, including the atomic bombs. It's astonishing the amount of power that's there. And what would I say to the founding fathers? I would have felt a lot better about talking to them 10 years ago, because 10 years ago I would have said, this energy, this degree of power is what you have liberated in human beings. It was your ability to harness the power of the individual that allowed us to harness the power of the atom. If you had not set us free from the kind of tyrannical government that had always existed prior to you and still exists today. The government does everything. And if you're the cousin of the dictator, doesn't matter if you got a 60 IQ, you're going to be the minister of education, whatever. The idea that by freeing the individuals to pursue their own self-interest and allowing the individual drive and passion and dreams, by setting that free, by building a place where you could pursue that, you have liberated so much intellectual and spiritual and moral energy that we can now put a steel tube anywhere in the ocean at any time with enough firepower to, people say destroy the earth, that's silly, but enough firepower to easily kill 300-400 million people if you wanted to. Enough firepower to win an entire war. Enough firepower to make sure nobody ever attacks us. That's really what those subs are there for. Obviously, they're not offensive weapons, they're defensive weapons. And I would try to say to them, this is what you've done. And then I would have to, if we did it today, then I'd have to spend a fair amount of time explaining to them why we're throwing all of this away. I would have to explain to them that you've made us so free and so prosperous and so safe that we no longer feel like we have to work very hard. We no longer feel like there are any external threats. We no longer feel like we have to play by the rules that got us to a place where we're so rich and so safe. And over time, people assume that safety and security and prosperity are the default states of mankind. That's just the way it is. We've been too successful for our own good. And we are joining the British and the French and the Spanish and the Greeks and the Etruscans and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Babylonians and all the rest, the Assyrians. We're joining them in the same exact problem. Peak of your powers, all the competition goes away, all of the prosperity is here, and then things just fall right apart. So that would be a little tougher to explain to them, although I suspect they would understand that too. They were so brilliant, studied so much history, that I think that's what I would say to them. And then, in terms of, it's a bleak assessment, but I think it's a true assessment. I don't think anybody has too much really that they can comment about that now. I think the answer is, I know this is not the kind of thing you generally want to wish for, but I'm actually at the place now where I think a small catastrophe is, a small disaster is going to be the only thing that saves us from a huge catastrophe. When I say a small disaster, I mean something significant. If California's economy collapsed, for example, just collapsed, would that get people to change? I don't think so. I think, the thing about America that's so interesting is the fundamental uniqueness about America. The reason there is such a thing as American exceptionalism is because it's where all of the risk takers went. All of the smart, brave people came here. And didn't matter where they came from. What they had in common is they were smart and they were brave, and that's why this country pretty much assimilated people so well, because while they may look different and sound different, I'm not trying to pretend there's no racism or any of that nonsense, but fundamentally the reason that we're not rioting in the streets the way they are in Europe is because what we have in common is much greater than what we left. We're all smart, courageous people. And the reason America was so powerful was because the immigrants were bringing that, and the Native Americans. When I say Native, I mean the whites that were living here prior to the last immigrant wave. We had challenges here, and we didn't have endless supplies of money, and we didn't have a world where we don't have to worry about anything in terms of threats. So yeah, we just brought in more, we were magnetized, brought in more and more smart and brave people, got stronger and stronger and stronger, and now there's no threats, and now there's no real want, and we just assume that it's given, and we start behaving like the idiots that we're becoming. I posted on the Facebook page that guy went down to Santa Monica, Venice Beach, and he interviewed people on the beach. He said, "Who is our nation's capital named after?" And they couldn't tell him. They didn't know the name of the nation's capital. And once they said Washington, one woman said, "Was it named after Lincoln?" No. And then just to stick the knife in, the last people he interviews are these two young, probably late 20s couple from Italy, a man and a woman from Italy just visiting. He's got nothing but, I don't know. Well, who's the nation's capital named after? I don't know. I'm not good with dates. We'll just take a guess. I don't know. Finally, they interview these two 30-year-old Italians, and they say, who's America's capital named after? And they said, George Washington. And he said, what can you tell me about Washington? Well, he was a founder of the country. He was the general during the Revolutionary War, and he basically gave birth to the United States militarily, and that's why they named the capital after him. And I saw another one by the same guy not just a day or two ago. He was walking down the streets of Venice on the beach in California, where the stupidest people live, and I ought to know because I'm here, asking them, did they think that and I'm not making this up, would gun control have prevented Lee Harvey Oswald from shooting Jesus? And every single one of them said, no, I think if they wanted to get the gun, they'd get the gun anyway. So you think that Oswald would have shot Jesus whether there was gun control or not? Yeah, I think he probably would have gotten through. And then he asked him, when do you think that happened? When do you think Jesus was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald? How long ago do you think that happened? What year? I'm really not very good with dates. It's not one person. If it's one person, it's fine. It's just an endless supply of people saying, I don't know. He's saying, I don't know, 1500, 1600? So, yeah, let's say, I guess about 1600. So Christ died around 1600? Yeah, that seems right. 1600, 1700, somewhere in there. You know, this is the result of us being too successful. It's a result of our farmers being too good and our military being too good and our everything being too good, and then you just create a food supply for these leftist parasites to come in and just tell you that you're evil and wrong for having built all this wonderful stuff, and now we're going to take it away from you for your own good. We don't believe in heaven or hell or anything. We just are telling you that you're evil and you've done all these awful things, so give us all of this wealth that you've created, and we'll spend it for you. And we'll continue to tell you how awful you are, and we just buy it because we're guilty. We're guilty because we know we don't face the kind of threats that our ancestors faced, and if we did, we wouldn't be such dicks. And we're going to get the threats, don't you worry. That's what I'm quite sure of. I like this one a lot. Kyle E. Christ asks, whenever I talk about the dangers of socialism, most often the accusation is, I'm secretly a socialist and I just don't know it. Progressives often cite that we're all paying taxes for the payment of roads and infrastructure, so what is the difference between socialism and taxing people to pay for the creation of a road? This is a great, great, great question, because this is, in fact, how stupid these people are. They say, well, America's a socialist country already. Really? Yes. I mean, we pay for the roads, the government pays for the roads, and the government, runs the air traffic control system, and there's government programs like Social Security that people love, and that's socialism. They may be right about Social Security. Building roads is government. Being the only people that can supply your health care is a state. And that's the difference. They like to say that conservatives don't want any government. Another sentence I'm happy to be extremely proud of is, it's not that we don't want any government, we just want a government that fits in the box it came in. And it's just that simple. Paving roads is one of the few things that this federal government is authorized to do, I think. Defending us from enemies is another thing that they're authorized to do. But they're not doing either of these two things. They're letting the roads and the bridges fall into the ravines, and they're not only not enforcing the borders, they're telling those few people left who are trying to defend the borders, the federal government is saying, you will not defend this country anymore. You're just going to have to take it and just let these people in. It's the active destruction of America. It's intentional. It's not any question about it. When you tell Border Patrol agents that you can no longer arrest illegals, even though they're coming into the country with AK-47s loaded with drugs, bringing in terrorists and all the rest, they'll say, no, you can't stop them anymore. That's, what would you call that? It's infiltration. It's opening the doors of the city at midnight and letting the barbarians in. And it's always some silk-robed son of a bitch from the palace. It's never the people up on the walls. So we have, in the U.S. Constitution, a blueprint for what the government should do and not do. And building roads is not socialism. It's, in fact, the precise purpose of a government. Enforcing the law is the purpose of the government. That's what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to be on the field playing and blocking guys they don't like and tackling guys they don't like, and then, running interference for guys they do like. Their job is to enforce the rules and not play the game. But that's no longer the case in terms of government. When Barack Obama can take $500 million of our money and sink it into a solar cell company called Solyndra because he personally thinks that solar energy is a great idea, that is, now we're talking about socialism. We're talking about, look, here's how you can tell whether you've got a socialist country or not. When you go to the doctor, who's paying for it? I mean, what does it say on the door? If it says Amana, then if you don't like the health care that you're getting from Amana, you can go across the street to a hospital that says Blue Cross. And if you don't like that particular health and you don't think that those doctors are any good, you can go down the block a ways and you can go into a hospital that says Kaiser Permanente or Southeastern Florida Regional Medical Center. But if, on the other hand, it says the National Health Service, now you know you're there. And every time you hear something that's called the National Health Service, the one thing you can be sure of is that it is national, but there's no health and there's no service. Somebody compared American cancer survival rates to both Canadian and British. They're both so proud of their health care system. We have free health care. No, you don't. Nobody has free health care. You have prepaid government health care. It comes out of everybody's check whether you need it or not. You have prepaid health care. And your health care is miserable compared to our health care. It's terrible. Our cancer survivor, I'm just pulling numbers out of the top of my head, but something like U.S. prostate cancer survival rate in America is 87%, and in Great Britain it's 33%, something like that. In Canada it's 58%, something like that. It's 20 or 30 percentage points better than it is in Canada, and Canada's another 20, 30% better than it is in Britain. Socialism is the idea that the government can allocate resources better than individuals. Ultimately, going back to my previous analogy, you have a socialist government when the referee is on the field playing the ball. That's socialism. When the government is allocating resources for the entire economy instead of just the very small sliver of the economy necessary to build a road. When the government is deciding policy and they're engineering industries to succeed and tax subsidies for these people and tax penalties for these people and stuff, then you've got socialism. And the problem with socialism is it's so stupid. Socialism is a failure of intelligence. Socialism is a failure of intelligence. The idea that 10 really smart people in a room in Washington are going to know what's better to do with this $70 trillion of property in this country than 300 million people who have all different kinds of experience who are working on just their little corner of it in real time. These progressives actually believe that 10 big-brain people sitting in Washington, they're not big-brain people, because if they were big-brain people, they'd be making money like Steve Jobs and doing some good. But they actually believe that a steering committee in Washington or in Stockholm or anywhere else can determine what's best for the economy when the economy is composed of trillions of interactions on a daily basis among millions, hundreds of millions of people, each one of them acting in their own local environment, using their own local intelligence, doing everything they need to do in real time. You have 320 million processors working on the economy at any given day in America in a free economy. Any given day in America in a free economy, you got 320 million processors running at an average speed of 100, making decisions to see how best to allocate these resources. 300 million people are trying to decide what the best use of these allocated resources are. Socialism is when 10 people do it. Not 300 million, not 30 million, not 3 million, not 300,000, not 30,000, not 3,000, not 300. Maybe not even 30, maybe 3. Socialism is orders of magnitude too stupid to deal with this problem, which is why in socialist countries you have nothing but waits, nothing but lines. They'll say, well, that's not true in Denmark, but it is true in Denmark. And Sweden is true too. And you can't count Sweden and Denmark because we pay for their defense. And we also invent all the stuff that they use. They've got great healthcare in Sweden. Well, they've got great MRIs in Sweden, but they didn't invent the MRIs. We invented the MRIs, because when you are taken care of from cradle to grave, you don't invent anything. The last big Swedish invention was the dialysis machine in 1953 or something. And before that, it was a spherical bearing in the 1920s. That's all they've done. If these people are that educated, and they are, where's all the stuff? What have they produced? Nothing. They've produced nothing. And the same for Denmark, and the same for all the rest of these paradises on Earth. They don't invent anything, because they are essentially old folks' homes. They're nursing homes. That's what socialism is. It's a nursing home. I don't want to have to worry about my dinner. Okay, we'll take care of that for you. And I don't have to worry about doing my wash. Don't worry, we'll take care of that for you. And I don't want to have to worry about what time I go to bed again. Don't worry, we got that taken care of. What's the point? I mean, seriously, the socialism treats people like livestock. And even in the idyllic, perfect world that these progressives like Bernie are talking about, this kind of Danish kind of, cradle-to-grave free education, free this, free that, and everything you do, free education, great, college education, fantastic, you get a free college education. It's not free. You keep 5 cents on the dollar. Denmark has the highest consumer debt in the world. And it also has the highest suicide rate in the world. Doesn't anybody find that interesting? A car that costs $20,000 in America costs $45,000 in Denmark. They don't have options there. They just don't want the responsibility. That's really what it comes down to, by the way. Now we're really on brass tacks. People want socialism because they don't want the responsibility of freedom. They can't handle it. It's not even they can't handle it. They're too lazy. They would rather have crap that was taken care of than go out and work for gold. They would rather have crap given. It's just laziness. That's all there is to it. Laziness. And in order to make these socialist paradises work, you need to have more people coming in at the bottom than are checking out at the top. And the Swedish birth rate is what, 1.3? Every 50 years there's half as many Swedes? You can't run socialism like that. It's a Ponzi scheme. Socialism is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. As long as you've got enough people on the bottom, you can take stuff from them, more stuff than they would need to take from otherwise, but I'll take stuff from you, and you, to feed this guy cradle to grave. Now, what do we do about the 4 of you? Well, that means we have to have 16 people below you that we're going to take stuff from so that you guys can retire cradle to grave. What do we do about the 16 below them? And so on. And so, if you have a growing economy, a growing population of Swedes, you can keep this up for a while. But socialism, among the many other things it does to destroy the human spirit, you don't produce anything. Why would you? You don't have a dream. What do you need a dream for? Why are you going to work hard? What's the point of working hard? Working 3 jobs so that you can get a degree or something. What's the point? You're going to make the same amount of money as you did if you didn't anyway. So there are no dreams, there's no inventions, there's none of this stuff. And we want our benefits, so we have to bring in other people to work for us. And the people they're bringing in are murdering them. They're murdering them and raping them. And they don't feel any sympathy towards them. They don't feel any gratitude. They feel nothing but contempt. And you know what? On some level, I think they're right. I think if I was one of these Muslims in Stockholm, I would feel nothing but contempt for these people who try to buy us off, and who, every time we smack them and every time we murder them or rape them, they just simply try to be nicer to us. What would you do with that? It's an old folks home. It's a nursing home, and it doesn't. It's livestock. That is what a slave is, right? As a person who's fed and cared for and housed by somebody else. I don't understand it. I do understand it, actually. I can't connect to it emotionally, but I do understand it. People are lazy, and Americans used to be motivated by what they wanted when it was okay to have stuff, back before having stuff became the greatest form of evil, and killing the planet too on top of it. They used to be, I want a nice house. What are you going to do about it? Well, I guess I'm going to have to work my ass off. For how long? 50 years maybe? Sounds about right. Get going. And now you can have all this groovy stuff, but it's actually yours. And while I'm at it, maybe I'll invent the iPhone or something. But no, they don't. But these kids are too lazy. It's not just the kids. It's the people who can't compete. And just keep that in mind. The people that love socialism are people either too stupid or too lazy or both to go out and make their own way in the world. or too frightened. They're just too frightened of freedom. They don't like the idea that, how am I going to find my next paycheck? Well, that's reality, kids. Better save some money, and you better be thinking about it. It makes me nervous. Okay, back into the cage you go. We're doing time here. We're getting pretty close. Okay, I think probably the last one, and then we just do a little wrap. This is a pretty complicated one. It's from Kurt Von Arnold, who says, Bill, in part one of your latest trifecta installment, which is about the ethics of Islamic immigration in Europe, and then part two is in America. In part one of your latest trifecta installment detailing the threats and challenges posed by Islamic immigration, Scott Ott stated, quote, the vast overwhelming majority of Muslims in America, Britain, and everywhere else are peaceable people who will never do anything horrible or break any laws or anything like that. Steve Green, however, detailed how Brussels police had a line on the Brussels attackers, but that the authorities received no help from the Muslim communities in locating them, and that they were effectively granted a safe haven by those communities. Those two statements, at least to this lowbrow, knuckle-dragging conservative, seem somewhat contradictory. I know that none of you are the type to pay lip service to political correctness, so my question is this. Am I guilty, as my many progressive detractors assert, of lacking an ability to appreciate nuance? Or is this an example of how the innate desire of conservatives to act fairly and honestly towards an issue actually stymies effective strategies to confront the problem? That's perfectly put. That's beautifully, profoundly put. This is what progressivism is today. Do you know why the press never announced that it's a Muslim shooting? Do you know why you never read in the New York Times that they'll never, a gunman, a radical, an extremist, open fire, extremists in the streets of Brussels, radicals or extremists, youth, violence, but they never say what it is. And the reason they never say what it is because our elites in New York, in the ivory towers of the news media, think that if Americans knew that these were repeatedly Islamic attacks, then we just roll down the street and find any Muslims we can and beat them to death with a tire iron. That's what they think we would do. And there's a subtle point to be made here, but it nevertheless needs to be made. They think that we would do that. The reason they think we would do it is because secretly they think they would do it themselves. I just saw an article on guns where I don't know, this woman said, I don't let my kids go over, and before I let my kids have a play date at somebody else's house. And I said, okay, great. Already we know what kind of person you are, a play date. Let's get that booked. Let's get out our organizers and find it. So Timmy's free, and I'm not making this up. This is exactly how it happens out here in New York as well. Timmy's free between, let's see, he's got a 2:30 and on Thursday, but he's got from 3:30 till about 5 on Thursday. And the next Tuesday, I think Timmy's got the morning between 10 and noon where he can come over and play with Jeremy, but at noon, I'm going to have to come and get play dates. Okay, so we already know what kind of parents these are. And they say, well, I will not, this woman wrote this article saying, I will not allow my children over to a house until I've asked whether or not they have guns in the house. And if they do, then my child is never going into that house because of all the children that are shot and one more gun, one more child, one more death, this whole thing. What is it that they're saying? What she said was, and you'll occasionally hear people admit this. In the article, she said, I just don't like the idea of those guns lying around. I'm concerned that somebody's just going to pick it up and start shooting. And to be honest with you, I'm a little worried that I might do that myself. Exactly. That's it. I'm telling you. That's what it is. That's why they fear guns. They fear guns because their impulse control is so suspect that they secretly are worried that they're going to do it. They don't want a gun in the house because they're secretly worried that they'll get so angry that they'll just shoot somebody. This is their great fear. Their fear is that they're going to act out on these primal impulses. The same thing with the news. That's why I brought it up. The news is worried. The news media is concerned that if they tell us that these attacks are all done by Islamicists and they show us the actual riots and the actual rapes and all the rest of the stuff in Europe, then the people will riot and they'll just go out and kill all the Muslims. But that's not what the people do. That's what the leaders think they will do, because that's what the leaders are kind of thinking they would do themselves. These elitist idiots. Now, when you don't tell the people what they know to be true, then there's a big disconnect between what you're told and what you can see with your own lying eyes. In Sweden, they would say 3 women were raped on a ferry out in the bay by 4 Swedes from Malmo. The 4 Swedes are recently naturalized immigrants from Algeria, but they won't let you know that. But the people know. The people know. I don't know what the latest statistic was, but I know for a 5-year period there, the number of rapes committed by Muslims in Oslo, Norway, what percentage of total rapes in Oslo over a 5-year period were committed by Muslims? What percentage of the total rapes? It's 100%. It's 100% of them, all of them. And so when people are confronted with the evidence of what they can see out their window versus what they're told by their leaders, and plus what they're told is the right thing to do. We're not racist. We're not racist under anyone. No. We're not racist. As a matter of fact, to show you how not racist I am, please rape my 14-year-old daughter. Because then, if you rape my 14-year-old daughter, then I will not only want you dead or in jail, I'll actually give you more benefits, and I'll say it's my fault, it's my daughter's fault, it's not your fault. See how not racist I really am? It's a death wish. It's suicide. And it's a result of people who are utterly brainwashed into thinking that their entire culture and their entire way of life is immoral, illegal, and awful. And this is what's going on. So to get back to the heart of the question, the elitists cannot hold these 2 ideas in their mind at the same time. They think that either the American people must be kept in the dark, and if they're not kept in the dark, then they're going to murder innocent Muslims by the millions. Probably because that's what they think they would do. But that's not the way it is. Conservatives can hold 2 thoughts in their mind at the same time. So we can say there is a significant percentage of this population of this particular religion that is a real danger. And you're so Islamophobic. It's like, well, you know what? I'm not Hindu-phobic, and I'm not Buddha-phobic, and I'm not Confucian-phobic, and I'm not Druidophobic. I'm not Semitophobe, and I'm not any of these other things. I don't worry about or particularly fear Hindus or Confucians or animists or Druids or pagans or Jews or Christians or lay them on. But there is one religion that's at war with everybody all the time and has been since it was invented. And that religion is the one that's gotten itself this reputation. I didn't make the reputation for it. They did. So it's a problem. It's a problem because it's a religion of conquest. It's a religion of enslavement. And it's a religion of brutality. And everything in it is brutal. So we have to accept that this is real, and we can do both at the same time. You're saying, how can it be true that so many moderate Muslims are innocent and perfectly good civilians and perfectly good neighbors, and at the same time you've got this giant problem? Well, we talked in this Trifecta episode about a guy named Asad Shah. This is the saddest story I've heard in a long time. Asad Shah was, by all accounts, a lovely man in a neighborhood in Glasgow, Scotland, and he was just a little shopkeeper, kind of like a 7-Eleven, small grocery store, I think. And everybody in the neighborhood loved him, and he's in Glasgow, Scotland. And on Easter, Asad Shah tweeted, "Happy Easter to our Christian brothers, and I hope that, through the words of Holy Jesus, we can all come to a better understanding of something, of life." So something very much like that. And a Muslim in England or in Scotland drove 200 miles to find him. That instant saw the tweet, drove 200 miles to find the guy, and stabbed him to death on the front steps of his store. Now, this is a perfect story because, by all accounts, this is exactly the kind of neighbor you would want, right? He's a different religion. He wishes you happy Easter. He's not the guy who's going to try and tear down the Christmas displays in town square on Christmas. He's going to say Merry Christmas to you, and you can say Happy Ramadan to him, and he makes a perfectly good neighbor, and everything's fine. He's murdered by the Muslims who think that this is blasphemy. So you've got both of them here. And what do you do? How do you protect Asad Shah, and how do you find the person that killed him and make sure that that guy is blown into little tiny little pieces slowly. How do you do both of these things? Well, you have to do both of these things. So I'm not going to get into how you do it. I mean, not saying I couldn't answer that, but it's weeks of stuff, Kurt. But it's not contradictory. I think the best way to think about it is this. There are, in fact, many millions of moderate Muslims in this country and in Europe. And Assad Shah was one of them. Lovely, lovely person. And he's murdered. And the main reason he's murdered is not to send a message to the Christians or the Scots. He was murdered to send a message to any other moderate Muslim who might have the temerity to want to get along with everybody else. And these Islamic jihadis, it's all about world conquest. We can't have Muslims being good neighbors. They've got to fear us. So I think if you want to think certainly the way I think about it is, these moderate Muslims, most of them are terrified for their lives. They're worried that if they speak out, they'll be singled out in a way that I won't be singled out. I'm out there criticizing Islam every day for the last 12 years or whatever. I'm not particularly worried about running into one of these guys. It crosses my mind, but what am I going to do? Shut up? But their concern is if they do it as a Muslim, then they're going to be targeted and killed. So when you say that, you've got people living in fear who should be standing up. They should have the courage to stand up. And if they did have the courage to stand up, and the American people saw moderate Muslims condemning in no uncertain terms these murders and walking hand in hand and turning them into the police and doing all those other things, then we wouldn't have this problem. Then we just go after the killers. But they're not doing that. And mostly they're doing it because they're scared, but some of them are doing it because they kind of agree with them. Some of them are doing it because they wouldn't mind the idea of an all-Islamic Scotland. So I think what it really comes down to is the difference between a sin of omission and a sin of commission. The jihadi murderers who are stabbing people are murderers, and the government, after Assad Shah was killed, they had a prayer vigil. They had a prayer vigil, and government members cried, and people had flowers, and everyone was very sad. And then the next day, they're going to have a demonstration of Muslims going down the streets of Glasgow saying, "Death to the UK, death to democracy, Islam is going to take over the world," and they're going to allow it. And they're going to just watch their own train come down the tracks and hit them after, you've been sitting there for half an hour waiting for this train to come, and sure enough, it hits them. And since the government won't protect itself, why would a moderate Muslim think that the government's going to protect them? It won't. Nothing's going to happen. They may catch this guy. They're probably in a big hurry to catch the guy who actually killed Assad Shah, but they're not going to raid the mosque that he came from, that ginned him up to do it. They're not going to do that, and the moderate Muslims know this. So even though they should be standing up, they're not. They're living in fear, and I have a hard time criticizing people who live in fear. I'll do it, but I understand it. So the murderers are committing crimes of commission. They're murdering people. They're calling for the violent overthrow of the society that gave them refuge. Out of the kindness and decency of our hearts, we gave them refuge. Those people need to be deported or killed. Both, preferably, in my opinion. But the ones who are keeping quiet are committing a sin of omission. They're not hurting anybody, but they're not stepping up and doing the right thing either. It's the same thing as any other crime scene. If you see somebody walk up and beat a guy, a big guy's beating a girlfriend up, let's say, and beating her to death, and there are 5 or 6 grown men standing around watching, they're not guilty of murder, but they're not good people. They're guilty of something, but they're not murderers. They're just, and they're not even accomplices. But they are guilty of something. And that's where I think the moderate Muslims are. They're watching their own people murder other people, and they're too afraid to say anything about it. And so they allow it to continue. And then they wonder why people look at them funny in the malls when they didn't a year ago. I had an Uber driver, I'll say about 2 months ago, on the way down to the airport. that an Egyptian guy, and he'd been here for quite a while, young guy, 24, 25, something like this, but he's been in the country a long, long time. It's Glasgow. Did I say Glasgow? Sorry. I'm getting updates. It's certainly, I wanted to say Glasgow. Glasgow. Yeah, I hate it when people get... There's not a British person in the world who ever gets the name of my city right. Every time they talk about the city I live in on the BBC, they say... And Barack Obama visited Los Angeles. Nobody says Los Angeles. In any event, yeah, apparently the killer came up from England. It wasn't Scottish. But look, it's a sin of omission. But you are complicit in the same way that the people who were watching this woman being beaten to death and could stop it are not guilty of the murder, but they are on some level not innocent either, you know? They're in that area, that gray area. And I don't know what to do about that. But anyways, back to this guy who was this Uber driver. And he's, you know, dark-skinned guy with a black beard. And we started talking, and he's, you know, he said, yeah, it's been the last year or two, people are looking at me differently. How so? Well, I'm getting a lot of really severe looks and sneers, and people are telling me to go back home, and, you know, I've been living here for naturalized citizen since, you know, whatever, for 10 years. I've never seen anything like this before. And we had a conversation, and we started talking about it. We didn't have enough time to really get into it. But on one hand, needless to say, I'm embarrassed about that, and I feel for the guy, because he didn't do any of this stuff. But at the same time, he didn't do anything to stop that image. That's where I'm going with this. He didn't do anything to stop that image of him. He didn't cause the image, but people who have his name and his look and his religion did, and he didn't do anything about it. He didn't do anything about it. And so now he's being tarred with a brush that he wasn't guilty, but he wonders why people are looking at him funny and suspiciously, when in fact, if the moderate Muslims in America forcefully came out every time one of these things happened and said, this is not Islam, this is not us, we condemn them, they're going to wake up in hell, and we are going to march in the streets with people arm in arm, and we're going to wear red, white, and blue head scarves, and our burqas are going to have stars and stripes on them, and we're going to show American citizens that these people don't speak for us. And then we wouldn't be looking at these guys funny. Then we'd just be concentrating on the terrorists. But we don't concentrate on just the terrorists because the moderates aren't doing anything. They're not speaking up. We never, ever. CARE always comes out and says, well, this is a dangerous backlash, and this is a violation of our rights. And even on the smallest scale, what the guy says, I'm not a terrorist, I didn't do it. That's right, you're not. But you also didn't make a point but you also didn't stand up against it. You haven't, as a group, you haven't, you know? And I think the thing I'll probably close this on, I think it's in the second trifecta, but I met a guy a couple times, Father Trenum, I want to say. He's an Eastern Orthodox priest out in Redlands. And I met him in Redlands about 4 days. I did a speaking event, been scheduled way before, about 4 days after San Bernardino. And he's this huge guy. He's like 6'3" or 4", and he's a little bit like Rasputin, a much better looking guy, but he's a real handsome guy and big, strong guy. And he comes out there and he has this passionate, ringing defense of Christianity, which you just don't hear anymore. An enthusiasm. It's almost like he believed it. And I got a chance to see him just a couple days ago at another event backstage, and he said, and I said to him, I was talking about this, because his church and the mosque that was the mosque that the San Bernardino shooters came from are like a couple hundred yards away, and they met each other and know each other, and they're clergymen in a small town. And after the murders, the imam of that mosque just disappeared, just boarded it up and just disappeared. They just went full turtle, went in there. And I said, well, what would you do? He's a priest. He's got a congregation. He's every day preaching a philosophy to people. And on some level, he's responsible for the philosophy. He's not responsible for what people do with it, but he's responsible for the tone anyway. And so I said to him, well, Father Trenholm, what would you do if it had been you? What would you do if it had been two of your members of your congregation who'd shot up a Muslim birthday party or something? And he said, well, the first thing I would do is I would think about every word I'd ever said and wonder what I might have said to put it into their hearts. The second thing I would do is I would not only cooperate with law enforcement, I would throw open the doors to law enforcement. I would have anybody who had any connection with them whatsoever come in and get on the trail of how this happened, why it happened, and who they're connected to so it doesn't happen again. But he said then the main thing I would do is I would go out into the community with my congregation and I would talk to anybody I could find to make it crystal clear that these people are not us. They don't represent us. They don't speak in our name. This is a perversion of our religion. And we would get out there and we'd do whatever community work we could. We would make it clear as we could, that we not only utterly condemn these people, we condemn this act. This is not our religion. And I'd make a big stand on it. And I would just keep hammering it until people believe me. And I said, spoken like an innocent man. And Scott on the show said, spoken like a free man, like a guy who's not afraid. And that's pretty much it. So, this is the moral conundrum. This is the problem. If it were just nice people, if all the Muslims were like Assad Shah, we wouldn't have any problems. And if all the Muslims were like the guy who killed him, we wouldn't have any problems either. We'd have a bigger problem, but we could deal with that problem. We just get these people and take them out and make them go away. But we've got both, and so how do we get one without hurting the other? And I just keep coming back to this sense of Germany. The Nazis at their peak, I think, were 7% of the population of Germany, and it is unquestionably true that the German people as a whole knew nothing about Treblinka, nothing about Auschwitz, Belsen, Sobibor. They knew nothing about these things. That's true. They didn't know about them. And when they did find out about them, they were shocked. But they didn't know about the death camps, but they did know that their neighbors are disappearing, and they did know that some of them are moving into houses that used to be occupied by Jewish families. And they did know that these stores and these people they used to shop with are boarded up. And they did know that those people are not around anymore. So they knew something. Did they commit those murders? No. Did they orchestrate the murders? No. Are they guilty of murder? No. But they knew that people were disappearing, and they knew that they were benefiting from it, and they didn't do anything. And for most of the war, until the war really turned south after Stalingrad, one of the reasons they didn't do anything is because they were all moving up in the world. You take a Jewish family out of a nice apartment, they've been very successful, maybe they're doctors or something like that, and you take them away, and some German family gets that apartment now. And it's the same thing with the Soviets too, by the way. One of the reasons that this thing just went on is people just get nicer apartments, and when people are taken out and shot, you get their stuff. And sometimes their wives. And sometimes that would be the reason why you would have a guy shot. You denounce a guy and say he's a traitor. I heard him say bad things about Stalin. I take him out and shoot him. Now this woman I've always liked is single again. Guess what? So it's the difference between commission and omission, and the time is getting short here. And I want to say this too. It's not like we don't have any examples of the opposite. When big liberal god Franklin Delano Roosevelt locked up, hundreds of thousands of Japanese citizens, American citizens, and Time magazine called them all, like a week after Pearl Harbor, they called the Japanese Americans, especially out in California, called them Hitler's little yellow friends. That was a big injustice done to them. But what's interesting is, what did the Japanese do? Did the Japanese who were interred, the Japanese Americans, did they say, this isn't fair? It's not fair to me, and I'm offended, and it's wrong, and that's not what they did. What they did was they enlisted in the U.S. Army in record numbers, and the gallantry and the accommodations for bravery among Japanese American units in Germany were greater than any other unit serving. In other words, they didn't just sit there and say it's not fair. They went out to prove to America that they were as American as anybody else. And it's the same thing with blacks during the Civil War. They went out to prove it. And I don't see any of this at all. I'll tell you one thing. If Tea Party people started blowing up buildings and murdering people in the streets, if it was just Tea Party people, and I've been associated with the Tea Party, if it turned out that the Tea Party were murdering people, shooting people, gunning people down, the first thing I would do is I'd cooperate with any way I could with law enforcement to find out who's doing this and stop future attacks. The second thing I would do is I would start to say, well, what in this philosophy has driven people to do this? And frankly, if they kept doing it, I would leave the Tea Party and I would openly denounce them, and I would say this is not who we are or not who we wanted to be, not who we were, and I would dedicate my life to fighting them. And I'd just go out and say this, no. But we don't see this. And I think this is the problem. And the reason we don't see it is because we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it because of political correctness. So this is all this disease, and these wounds fester, and the racial wounds fester, and this president has set race relations back 100 years, and now everybody's furious and everybody's murderously angry because no one's allowed to actually talk about it. No one's allowed to come out and say it, which is why I try my best just to say it, just to say it. Because once you say it, you can at least talk about it and get it out there. But no one will even speak about these things in this world today. And that's what progressives have to succeed. They have to have an absolute media blackout of anything that's not their ideas, because their ideas are so poor that when they're compared to other ideas, they lose. And then they have to go out and get a job. But they don't want to get a job. They want the nice things that comes with wealth, but they're too stupid and too lazy to go out and earn it. Gosh, it's just, I don't know. Anyway. It's about time for me to go. It's coming up on 2 hours since we started rolling this thing. I do have a last-minute appointment that came up that I need to go to right now. So that could be interesting news in the future, however. Anyway, that will probably do it for Stratosphere Lounge number 116. Every time I hear these numbers get bigger, I mean, it's just absolutely astonishing. Just astonishing that people would sit and listen to this for the length of time that they have, but they certainly have. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. We got the new website up and running. We'll talk some more about that if you haven't seen it already. And we're cranking out firewalls and afterburners, and went through some rough times. Our operations manager, who's just the center of this organization, just makes everything run, Carla. Her mom died, I think, the day before Jerry. So both of us have been, not been a lot going on in the office here. It was a long illness for her mom, too. So now we're back in the saddle here and starting to pick up the pace again. So I've got a firewall I'm going to write tomorrow, I think, that I like a lot. Involves dreadlocks. And I saw some people talking about that over there. But as always, thanks so much for the support, and thanks for the kind words about Jerry and for Jerry, which meant an awful lot to him and certainly to me. Other than that, I think next week I will not be here. I think next Wednesday I am in Palo Alto at a little high school closed event. So I think I'm going to have to miss next week, but the week after that I should be back on schedule. So that's about it. As always, thanks for your support. Members especially, thank you for everything. Strata Loungers, above all, the finest people in the world. And I guess that means until next time, we will see you here in the Stratosphere Lounge. So everybody take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.